Hello, and welcome to the Minded Podcast, an Emmanuel podcast on mental health, where we are spiritually minded in our discussions, community minded in mission, and like minded in our hope that we find through Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for joining us. And today, you all, we're going to be talking a little bit about ways to improve your mental health, giving you a few quick tips on what that looks like for you all. A few weeks ago, we talked about a definition for mental health. And mental health, if you remember, includes our emotional well being, our social well being, and our psychological well being. And I would also add it also includes our spiritual well being. So we're going to take a look at what it means to improve those different areas of our mental health. Because again, we all have mental health. Not all mental health leads to mental illness or mental disorder, but our mental health is so important. It impacts our physical health. It impacts so many different areas of our life. And so we need to be mindful of how we're monitoring our mental health and what that looks like. And so that's what we're going to do a little bit about today. We're going to take a look at what it looks like to improve the areas of mental health. And so the first thing I think it's important when we look at ways to improve, we have to look at, well, where am I at right now? What is my baseline mental health? Let's take inventory of where we are now. It's kind of like if you are about to clean your house or about to do a renovation. You take a look at where you are, what you need, what needs to get thrown out, what needs to be revamped, what needs to be repainted, what needs to be just totally thrown out. And then you begin to make lists of what you need. And I think it's a similar way for our mental health. Let's take inventory. Where is it that you're lacking? Maybe it's in your emotional health. Maybe it's in your thought life and your perceptions and how you perceive life and the lens through which you look through life. Maybe you have anxious thoughts, depressed thoughts. Maybe you're very pessimistic. Maybe you view things through a lens of being a victim, where things are always happening to you. People are doing things to you. Take inventory about what your relationships look like. What and who are you connected to? So it's like getting a report card, giving yourself a report card. And I think that's the hardest part because taking inventory causes us to really hold that mirror up and take a look at us and say, where could I be healthier? In what areas of my life could I be stronger? And it causes us to have to really be honest with ourselves. It doesn't matter if you lie to me or lie to your friend or lie to your girlfriend, but you can't lie to yourself, and you definitely can't lie to God. Like, He knows. And so that first step is taking inventory. And so what I recommend is getting a tablet, something similar to this, or a journal, and drawing 3 or 4 columns. And at the top of each column, one, put emotional health, put psychological health, social well-being, and then your spiritual well-being. And then under each heading, document, identify where you are now and the areas that you're weak in and want to get stronger in. And just use that for your own personal use. It doesn't have to be shared unless you're maybe have a best friend or someone that you're close to, but that you want to share that with. So the first step is taking inventory, identifying and writing down the areas that you're lacking, and then also identify the areas that you're strong in, because we want to capitalize on your strengths as well. So the first thing that I think, one of the biggest tips that I can tell anyone improving your mental health is you got to rest. And how many of us are constantly on the go? We're multitasking, we're doing work, we're doing family, we're involved in church, we're involved in the community. If you have children, they're involved in sports, they're involved in activities. School's coming to an end, but there's summer camp, there's still things that you have to do. And so one of the things I'm realizing as I get older, I'm not going to tell you my age, but I need to rest. And resting is even scriptural. Like, our ultimate rest is in Jesus Christ. But if you look at the scriptures, there were times identified in the scripture that even Christ rested, because we have to remember He was 100% man and 100% divine. And so when we look at Mark chapter 1, verse 35, it says that Jesus goes to an isolated place to pray, and this is before daybreak. And so again, if Jesus takes time to go away to pray and reset and refocus and rest, then we have to as well. Also, in Matthew 14 and 13, after Jesus heard the news of John the Baptist being killed, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone, to set himself apart, to rest. And sometimes we have to do that. And that kind of goes hand in hand with one of my other points that's a little further down on my list, but I'm going to talk about it now, which is get off the grid. Sometimes we have to get off the grid. And that might mean cutting that cell phone off, putting it on Do Not Disturb. That might mean getting off of social media for a little bit after you watch the podcast, getting off social media for a little bit, not taking as many calls after a certain time at night, or it might mean for you going away to an isolated place, whether that's a day trip that you take by yourself, whether it's you go to the beach, that's the positive thing with living on the Eastern Shore. We're only about a half hour from the beach. So getting off the grid so that you're not always so easily distracted by the things that are going on in your life, or multitasking. Sometimes we may have 8 or 7 balls that we're juggling in the air. And again, I can't speak about men. I can only speak from a women's point of view. But many times we juggle 8 and 6 things, and we do it really well until we crash and burn. And we're tired, and we're overwhelmed, and we're overworked, and we're burnt out, and we're burning the candle at both ends. And that's not doing anything for our mental health. We're saying that, I'm doing this for my family. And again, this is not about denying your family. This is not about denying your duties as a mate or a wife or whatever that might look like, or coworker. But it's saying, let's build in some rest. Let's build in some breaks throughout the day. And part of that rest is having good sleep hygiene. Again, I'm stepping on my own toes with some of this because I'm a night owl. I like to stay up late, and then I have a hard time getting up in the morning. But I need to work on having a good sleep routine and good sleep hygiene, and that looks different for everybody else. But when I was looking at some numbers on what is a good night's sleep for a typical adult, the average is around 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And for younger adolescents and children, that number is even higher. And so I'm thinking, wow, sometimes I'm getting like 4 and 5 hours of sleep because I'm up half the night, because that's when my brain just kind of turns on. But I'm working to try to be more diligent in getting a better bedtime. And so that might seem like, that's not nothing. But a lot of studies have been shown that when we're not getting sleep, that's connected to our physical health, like diabetes and other types of medical issues. So look, we're going to get some rest, y'all. We're going to start taking some breaks. We're going to make sure that we're getting that 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And again, if you're a teen, that might look like even a little bit more. And we're going to get off the grid. And part of that, like I said, is turning those cell phones off. And back to the sleep hygiene. Don't fall asleep with your TV on. Again, I'm horrible at that because I'm watching a movie, I fall asleep, I rewind it and fall asleep again, and I end up sometimes falling asleep with the TV on. But again, something about that blue light from our cell phone, from the TV, is not really conducive to good REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So we want to make sure as part of our sleep hygiene, we're cutting off the electronics, cutting off the TV, and really attempting to get that 7 or 8 hours worth of sleep. Connected to that is maintaining healthy eating habits. Again, some of this seems pretty basic, but sometimes it's in the small things, and that when we make those changes, we get the biggest gains. And so, again, from personal experience, when I'm not eating correctly, I feel more sluggish. When I'm eating more processed foods and fast foods, and Lord knows I love some Chick-fil-A. As Pastor Mark says, those people are really saved, right? People that go to Chick-fil-A and make that food, they're saved. They're truly, truly saved. But if I eat too much of junk food and fast food, I notice it in my mood. I'm more sluggish. When I'm eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and more lean meats and proteins and fish, my mood does really shift. There are some people that do different things when it comes to like clean eating and wholesome eating. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, so, I recommend that you get with a nutritionist if you're really struggling with maintaining healthy eating habits. And connected to that is taking care of this physical body. And again, as this is the only physical body that we get right now. We'll get our new bodies once Jesus raptures us away, and we'll get our glorified bodies. But for now, this is the only physical body that we have. And we have to take care of it through our physical appointments, doctor appointments, our well checks. So ladies, if you haven't done your well checks, your mammograms and all that, please, please make sure that you add that to a part of improving your mental health. Because again, when you're sick physically, again, that can also impact your emotions. If you're in chronic pain, you're not going to feel joyous. You're not going to feel full of hope. When you're in chronic pain and suffering and physical pain, that affects your emotional well-being. So let's make sure that we're getting those doctor's appointments, those well checks, and maybe grab an accountability partner, someone that you trust that can say, girl, have you been to your mammography, your yearly mammography, or your pap smear, or whatever those appointments are for you? Get an accountability partner, someone that will hold you accountable. Your dental appointments, I think those are like every 6 months, making sure that you are meeting those physical needs as well. And then another tip to improving your mental health is sometimes getting outside. I know with COVID, we were indoors for months. We were in the house for months, and some people haven't transitioned out of that since things are now obviously open, but some people are still kind of isolating themselves and not getting outside and seeing God's creation. Now go outside, put your hands in the dirt, plant, go to the beach, just be outside, get some natural sunlight. I think it's vitamin D or vitamin K that we get from the sun. Make sure you go out, even if it's walking to your mailbox or walking to the end of your street, walking in your neighborhood with some friends. It doesn't have to be where you have to, do anything formal. It can be something very relaxed. Because I don't know about you, if it's more relaxed and natural, I'm more likely to continue with it. And it has to be something that you like. What works for me might not work for you. So you want to make sure in the exercise that you're getting and going outside in nature and going outside and just getting some fresh air. When I was a kid, when we would grow up in the country, we'd be outside all day long. And if we tried to come inside, Grandma's like, stop that running in and out of the house. And she'd lock that screen door. But we'd be outside and play. And it's just something about being outside, even as an adult. And you can begin to just look around at God's creation and be thankful and grateful. And that, again, is going to shift your perspective. It's going to shift your mood. Your circumstance might not change, but your approach to your circumstance can change if we can get that perspective shifted. This next one, I think, is one of my favorites in encouraging people to do, and that's creating and maintaining community. None of us were meant to be in isolation. We were meant to be in community with one another. Again, that's going to look differently for everybody. Being in community doesn't mean you have 50,000 friends and you talk to each other 20 times a day, 7 days a week. That's not what I'm talking about. Community could be 2 or 3 people. It could be a small group at church. It could be a peer group at work. It could be a neighbor and two or three of your neighbors getting together for dinner. Community means so many different things, but we can do life alone, but we're not designed and meant to do life alone. When we are going through in our mental health or in our situations and we isolate ourselves, I truly believe that isolation is the breeding ground for toxic thoughts and toxic perceptions. And so, what do you mean, Dee? Well, I'm going through a situation and I'm isolating myself because maybe I feel embarrassed. Maybe there's some shame attached to it. Maybe I feel like no one's going to understand me. Nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody cares. Nobody loves me, right? I start to ruminate on all these negative thoughts and perceptions, or cognitions as we call them, and I'm isolating myself. And so when I'm isolating myself and have those same ruminations, it's like taking a microscope and putting it over an ant. And all of a sudden, what is small and there insignificant now becomes magnified and larger than it actually is, because the magnifying glass. It's the same thing with our thoughts. And we're in isolation. It's like putting a magnifying glass over it, and it's magnified 10 times what it actually is. Again, it can be still significant and impactful, but it becomes magnified when I'm alone. when I'm in isolation. In isolation in a negative way, not isolating in like, I just need to get away, get off the grid for a little bit. But this is where I'm tuning out my people circle. I'm tuning out community. I'm tuning out my friends. I'm tuning out my coworkers. And I'm creating this isolation. And that's where those thoughts can become toxic. And you have these unhealthy thoughts. And when our unhealthy thoughts become like a runaway train, again, that's going to affect our mental health. It's going to affect our emotions. We begin feeling more depressed, more anxious. We start making up scenarios, what if scenarios, which feeds our anxiety. And so building community helps us to become hopefully connected to folks that are like-minded, but also folks that will give us honest feedback and honest input about what we're going through. And again, I used to tell my clients that when we have community, not everyone's on the same level. And I kind of likened it to if I take a pebble and throw it in the water and it creates these ripples. Your closest ripple are like your ride or dies. Like you might tell them almost everything in your life and they're your close circle. And then the next biggest ripple might be small group. And you have connections there, but maybe you don't feel quite comfortable telling them real intimate details of your life. And that's okay. That's still a connection. And a next bigger ripple might be your work family, for example, where you'll talk about work-related issues. And if you have stress coming up related to the work-related issues, you talk about it with them. Or you might have family that are on that outer circle and friends that are on your inner circle. So you get to define what community looks like for you and who goes where in these ripples. Some people think, oh, automatically my family gets my ride or die. That's not everybody's testimony. Sometimes their ride or die and their closest are friends that are not blood related but are like family. And someone that starts out on your inner circle doesn't mean that they'll be there forever. Something might happen where you have to reevaluate your community with that person. And the person that started out on the inner circle maybe now moves out to an outer circle, maybe because you set boundaries and they consistently violated or broke those boundaries, or they broke a trust or a confidence. And so this community and people within your community, that can fluctuate. It's not just carved in stone. It can be very fluid, but we have to create and maintain community. You also want to begin, kind of connected to this, take inventory of your relationships. So take inventory of what and who you're connected to. So if you're constantly around, Sister Susie or Sister whomever, and you seem like every time you come from that interaction with that person, you're drained or you feel oppressed or you feel frustrated, maybe take inventory of what this relationship means. Maybe we have to reevaluate the terms of that relationship or that friendship or the boundaries around that. Or say you're in a relationship with a significant other and they're abusive in their language, they're abusive in their physical conduct towards you. It's time to reevaluate that relationship because those toxic relationships are going to impact your mental health. So again, take inventory of who and what you're connected to. And don't be afraid to set boundaries. Boundaries are simply limits that we place on our relationships. They're parameters, and they're meant to keep us safe. So, for example, there's financial boundaries. So you may have financial boundaries set with certain friends or family members where maybe you don't give them money. For example, say they have a drug problem, and a boundary that you've set with them is, I'm not going to give them money, but if they need groceries, I will go and buy them $50 worth of groceries, or nowadays maybe $75 or $100 worth of groceries, right? But you're not going to give them money. Or maybe it's someone that constantly blows up your phone, and that boundary is, well, I'm going to talk to them, but maybe I can only really talk to them a couple times a day. I can't talk to them 10 times a day because I'm working. Boundaries are meant to be fluid, flexible, and they're meant to be protective of us. Physical boundaries might determine how far you go in a relationship when you're with a significant other. So boundaries are meant to keep us safe. And sometimes people don't always honor our boundaries. It doesn't mean we can't set them. We do. We just have to be prepared what are the consequences that are going to take place if someone does violate my boundaries? Because we can't control whether a person honors and accepts our boundaries and abides by them, but we can control what our response will be if someone consistently is violating our boundaries. Setting no is a boundary, right? And sometimes those of us that are people pleasers, we tend to try to say yes to everything, yes to everyone, and we try to give our best yes, but sometimes we have to give our best no in order to say yes to our best yes. So, for example, that might look like saying no to extra work assignments so you can say yes to your son's ball game or concert or end of the year activity that you want to go to. But to say yes to that, you may have to say no to something else. And saying no, it seems easy. Again, it's just 2 letters, N-O. But yet for those of us that seek validation from others, that are people pleasers, conflict avoidant, sometimes we try to avoid no and we try to say yes to everything. But after a while, you say yes to everything, something is going to be lacking. Something that deserves your best yes, you're not going to be available for because you're trying to please everybody. You're trying to please everyone in every situation. And that's not going to happen, but that's okay because your mental health is at stake. After a while, we will all hit a brick wall if we don't take a step back, take inventory of what we're saying yes to, what we're saying no to. And when we burn and crash, things are still going to happen. We like to think that things will come to a halt when we stop. But the more I live, the longer I live, the older I get, I realize, you know what? God forbid if something happens to me tomorrow, I believe my work family will miss me, but they will replace my position. They might not be able to replace maybe the impact that I've had, but they will replace that actual physical position. And so a lot of us are burning ourselves out in different areas and thinking, oh, we're the only one that can do X, Y, or Z. And that type of perspective can really hinder your mental health. These next 2 seem easy, but again, sometimes we struggle. And one of them is practice gratitude. Because we live in a world where things happen, and things happen that are earth-shattering, that are traumatic, and it's hard to find gratitude. But gratitude is really an attitude. It's a frame of mind. It's a perception. It's how we look at life. It doesn't mean that everything is good, but it's our response to when things are bad to still try to find this attitude of gratitude. And the scripture does support that, in us giving thanks in all things. Again, it doesn't mean that all things are good, but it's from this perspective that we're trusting God, even though we don't see or understand that he's going to work all those things together for our good, even though we don't see it or understand it. And I say practice because it takes just that. It's practice. It's like building a muscle. Practice, practice, practice. I know one year I did this thing where I kept a gratitude jar. And every time something happened that I wanted to earmark and be grateful for, I wrote it down, put it on a little slip of paper, and put it in a jar. It was a little bit bigger than a mason jar. And then at the end of the year, in that December, I went through the jar to pull out and read these slips of paper, everything that I was grateful for. Because sometimes when we're overwhelmed with bad news or traumatic things, we lose sight of the things that God has done for us in the past. And it's a great way to be mindful of what God has done in the past, because the same God that brought me through 10 years ago is the same God that's going to bring you and me through the situation that we're going through currently. But it's natural. We sometimes lose sight of that. We become overwhelmed with what's not going right, and we focus more on what's not going right versus the things that God has done. And again, it doesn't mean we're like Pollyanna going through, tipping to the tulips like everything is perfect, but we're also recognizing that we serve a God who's faithful and who does not change, who does not shift, even when our circumstances shift, that we want to come to him. And the scripture says in Matthew that we can come to him, all who are weary and burdened are heavy laden, and he will give us rest. So again, back to that rest where our ultimate rest is in him. we have to let go of these burdens that we're carrying so we can hold on to Christ and giving our burdens to him. So practice gratitude. Again, maybe you won't do the whole, for 1 year charting down, the things that you're grateful for. Maybe it's keeping a gratitude journal. Maybe it's writing it on a sticky in the morning and putting it on your computer at work, or something in your home that you look at every day and you're reminded that you're grateful for whatever it is for that day. And I've even heard of families doing this as a family. So you can do this with your kids, again, instilling in them at an early age to practice gratitude. The next thing that, again, is that as believers we're mandated to do, but we find it challenging to do, which is practice forgiveness. Because unforgiveness, left unchecked, left not worked on or processed, leads to bitterness, leads to holding on to anger and resentment. And that in turn is going to impact your mental health. It's going to impact the lens through which you see the world, through which you see other people. So practicing forgiveness. And I should say, and again, that's a whole nother podcast on its own. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you're excusing the person that hurt you. Forgiveness biblically looks like this person did do something to you. They owe you a debt, but forgiving them is saying, I know you did something to me. You owe me this debt, but I'm releasing you from that debt, because that's what Jesus Christ did for us. That while we were yet sinners, it says in Romans, Christ died for us. And while we were still enemies of the cross, Christ died for us. So we owed him a debt. We owed Jesus our life, but we could not satisfy that debt. And the only way that debt was satisfied was through God sending his son, Jesus. And so he forgave us of this debt that we owed because he knew we couldn't pay it. And so we're called to do the same thing when someone does wrong against us and they owe us something, but we're saying, you know what, you owe me this, but I'm releasing you from that debt and I'm going to forgive you of that. Now, there is a difference, and again, I don't have time to go into it, between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness, I don't need two people for forgiveness. If my sister does something against me, I can forgive her, whether she acknowledges it, accepts it or not. That's forgiveness. For our relationship to be reconciled, then she has to do her part as well. So while I forgive her, our relationship might not be reconciled. Won't say that it can never be reconciled, but it might not be reconciled. The best example I can use, better than my sister example, is when I used to work at a crisis agency and I provided therapy to adults that were molested as children. And they were struggling with the idea of forgiveness and what that meant. And so the example of reconciliation, I would say to them, it's like, well, the forgiveness is saying that you're releasing them from a debt that they can never really repay anyway, right? There's nothing that they can do or say that once they do or say that thing that you're going to say, okay, I understand why you did what you did, and that makes sense why you did it, and now I forgive you. No, it's never going to make sense why they did what they did. So you can forgive them without them ever acknowledging anything, right? It would be helpful if they did, but let's say they don't, you can still forgive that person. A reconciliation is a whole nother thing, because they would have to have an acknowledgement of what they did. They would have to seek and ask for your forgiveness. So it's a whole nother realm of reconciliation is. But at the basics, we're called to forgive. And we're also called for the ministry of reconciliation. But in certain circumstances, a reconciliation is only going to happen if the other party is wanting that as well. And the other one is, another tip is finding opportunities to serve, right? Well, you may say, well, what does that have to do with mental health? Well, sometimes we can become so self-focused on what we're going through that we don't see opportunities to help others. And so seeing an opportunity and taking the opportunity to help others can also, again, it shifts our perspective. It gives us a purpose to put our hands to. It helps us to even help others through something similar that they may be going through that we went through. And so it's a way of giving back to others. And again, serving is biblical, where we come and we're serving the least of those. We're taking care of those that maybe are unable to take care of themselves or are lacking in certain areas. And again, it just shifts our focus from a self focus to a others focus, to a community focus, to a mission focus. But again, hand in hand with that is while we do volunteer and serve others, we also practice self-compassion, right? Because many of people that have gone through things have this idea of self-loathing where they don't love themselves or they can't forgive themselves or they don't like themselves because of maybe something physical that they connect to themselves that they don't like. I don't like my eyes. I don't like my nose. I don't like my hair. I'm self-conscious about that. Or they don't like themselves because of maybe some traumatic things that they went through and they don't love themselves. Part of improving our mental health is showing ourselves some compassion. There are some people that are really great at showing others compassion, but they lack the ability to show themselves self-love because they feel like they don't deserve it, or because maybe they've done things in their past they're not, that they're ashamed of, that they then find it hard to love themselves or find compassion. But again, our mental health is dependent on it to show ourselves some self-love and self-compassion. And then the last thing before we go is, again, if you're doing these things, and again, these things aren't a one and done. This is a lifestyle. This is a pattern. This is something that we have to practice and do daily. That there are times where we may have to seek professional help and support. And that might be in the form of a counselor, a therapist. It could be in the form of an accountability partner or friend. It could be in the form of pastoral support or care. Or it could be in the form of a life coach. But the thing is to seek the help where you can get it. Seek that professional help because, again, we're not meant to be in this world alone. We're not meant to navigate things alone. And so when we have troubles, when we have these barriers that we're running into, it's okay. Like, it's okay to be able to admit I'm struggling, right? I know today, for example, someone said, Dee, are you okay? I said, you know what, to be honest, no, I'm not. I'm going to get through it, but really, no, I'm not okay. I'm going through some things. And so it's okay. We don't always have to give this response like everything is always great and we're the best that we've ever been and life is 100. Sometimes life is at 100, but sometimes it's like at like negative 100, right? And it's okay to admit that. Again, our mental health depends on it. Our mental health depends on it. Your mental health depends on it. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed this segment. Again, if something that was said or something that I mentioned prompted you to think about something and you want to reach out to get some help, we're going to have some information at the bottom of the screen where you can reach out to the National Alliance on Mental Health for some resources in your area. We're going to also include the 988 National Crisis Line that is manned 24/7. It's a national crisis line. So please, 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 you don't have to go through life alone. Comment in the section. There'll be someone that will be getting back with you if you need help with anything or need prayer. Again, thank you for joining the Minded podcast. See you next time.